I'm Doug McKelway. Happy to have the opportunity today to interview a guy whom I consider to be the alpha dog among Washington watchdogs. He is Tom Schatz with Citizens Against Government Waste. Tom, thanks for coming in today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here, Doug. Good to see you. Thanks.
I thought it'd be a wonderful time to talk to you because Washington is on a spending binge right now. We've got the total Democratic control of both houses of Congress and the White House, and they're using the opportunity to spend a lot of taxpayer money. Most recently, the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, which is a lot more than COVID relief.
Well, they are truly living up to the Rahm Emanuel philosophy of taking advantage of a crisis. And they even said that last year. Majority Whip in the House, Jim Clyburn, said, it's time to get our policies done, take advantage of this COVID relief. And there were dozens of quotes like that from Democrats. And they are doing that. There's no question about it. Less than 10% of that $1.9 trillion is going to what people would call COVID relief. And the rest is not only unrelated, it's being spent over a number of years. There's also $1 trillion unspent from the prior COVID bills. The total now, including extra interest on the national debt, is about $5.7 trillion from all of the COVID relief bills. This was the first one that was passed solely by one party, by the Democrats. And they have opened up the floodgates for policies that never could have gotten through in any other time.
You wrote recently, tucked within its nearly 600 pages are a number of pet projects, also known as earmarks, that have absolutely nothing to do with COVID. Take, for example, the $1.5 million set aside for a bridge connecting New York and Canada. Elsewhere, you'll find a cleverly worded provision for a subway from San Francisco to Silicon Valley. These projects will benefit the Democratic leaders of the Senate and the House. Who specifically are you referring to?
Well, one was for Speaker Pelosi, that $140 million that started out as $100 million, and then the House added another 40. And the Seaway Bridge was for Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Now, fortunately, the Senate parliamentarian knocked those out just on procedural basis in the Senate, because there's something called the Byrd Rule, has to be related to spending. It didn't qualify, they kicked it out. But that doesn't mean they're not going to come back, especially since they're now talking about restoring earmarks for the transportation bill. I'm sure they will be brought back in, and for the appropriations bill. So one way or another, that money will come back in. There was an amendment in the House by Representative Ashley Hinton, freshman member, who said, let's take the $140 million from the Speaker's transportation system and give it to projects that will help students suffering from mental health issues because they're not in class in person. And the House rejected that. So every single amendment that Republicans offered to either reduce spending or better target the spending was rejected in the House and in the Senate. And the $15 minimum wage, by the way, was also included in the original House bill, passed in the House, kicked out again by the Senate parliamentarian. So there are only a few items from the House bill that were removed, and the Democrats said, okay, we'll take the whole thing.
I want to delve a little bit deeper into earmarks. To play the devil's advocate, some wise person, I think it was my wife who covers Congress, once told me they are the glue that holds Congress together. It allows the leaders of Congress, the leaders of any one of the two parties, to herd their cats. But there's a darker side, obviously.
Well, not only that, are they having trouble spending money right now? I mean, that's been the excuse forever. There are a lot of excuses. One is, of course, the Article I power, the power to appropriate money. Earmarks have never constituted more than 1% of appropriated funds. In fact, the House Appropriations Committee Chair Rosa DeLauro and the Senate Appropriations Committee Chairman Pat Leahy have agreed to restore earmarks with 1% of the total appropriations. So it's about $15 billion a year. The most dollar amount of earmarks that Citizens Against Government Waste found was $29 billion in 2006, after which the Republicans lost the majority, members of Congress, staff, lobbyists went to jail. It's really the most corrupt, costly, and inequitable practice in the history of Congress. And we've seen those results. When members say, oh, we need to do this because it'll help us spend money, what it really means is that we're going to engage in legalized bribery by offering you, a freshman member of Congress, a few $1 million in earmarks so that you vote for this massive transportation bill. And that's how we got the bridge to nowhere in 2005. $24 billion in earmarks in that highway bill. And now the chairman of the House Transportation Committee, Peter DeFazio, is saying, oh, I want to have, I think it's 20% of the $2 trillion bill, I apologize, 6% of the $2 trillion proposed transportation bill, which is $120 billion in earmarks instead of $24 billion. So we will have a massive list of bridges, roads, buildings that have nothing to do with anything, and it will be remember that in those days we didn't have social media, at least not like we have now. Yeah. And there will be just a field day of people pointing out all the waste.
Right. And all of this happens behind closed doors. There's no light shown upon this.
That was true during the moratorium, but now they're talking about having these exposed, made public. The request will be made online. There's a set of criteria which I haven't memorized yet, so I'm going to take a look. But in the Appropriations Committee, they're online, certification, family has no interest in the project, has to come from nonprofits, state and local governments, and then 10 requests per member. Now, since you make a request doesn't mean you will get the request. When they listed the names of members of Congress in the back of the appropriations bills in 2008 to 2010, the 81 members of the House and Senate Transportation Committees, 15% of Congress, got 51% of the number of earmarks and 61% of the money. So they didn't get all 10 of theirs, and they'll throw a few morsels out for the rest of Congress. So that's the appropriations criteria. Quickly to transportation, it's a longer list, but it essentially follows what is done for the regular grant process at the local level. So you've got a local metropolitan planning organization. They decide what they want locally, like where the traffic light is going to be. They go to the state, Federal Department of Transportation, to Congress, and they prioritize. A member of Congress comes along, a campaign donor comes to him and says, I want that traffic light where I'm building a new building. And the member of Congress says, okay, we're going to move it over from the place that my local folks said is okay. So it usurps local priorities. It's not just a matter of taking extra money from taxpayers.
Well, this is just the start of the spending binge that we started this segment off with. We've got a new infrastructure plan coming down the pike and tax increases coming down the pike.
It means that everybody is going to be taking more, the government's going to be taking a lot more money out of everyone's pocket. $2 trillion transportation bill on top of the $5.7 trillion spent for COVID, which is on top of the regular appropriations that come out every year. Then you've got, of course, entitlement spending, which continues to go up. There were changes in this American Rescue Plan, the $1.9 trillion bill, that increases the amount spent for Obamacare, for Medicaid. These provisions have long-term consequences that will increase spending over time. A $4 trillion tax increase, which President Biden talked about during his campaign, it's not a surprise, will hit everyone, not just, quote unquote, the rich. There isn't enough money from the rich.
I want you to explain that because he said no one under $400,000 a year in income will get hit.
Well, that may be true about an income tax rate increase, but there are, of course, many other taxes that impact people directly and indirectly. And there's just no way that you can really say, oh, 400,000 is really the threshold. There are small businesses that will be impacted by this. They're going to change how partnerships and limited liability companies are treated, and those are 1, 2, 3 people, very, very successful small businesses. So someone may say, oh, well, you make a few $100,000, but you're not really making that much. You're putting the money back in your business. So it means the difference, if your taxes increase by 10% and you're making 500,000, right? That's 50 grand. So that's a person or 2 people that you won't hire. So it has a devastating impact on employment for small businesses, and it means that there will be less household income to buy the goods and services that the economy needs to make to keep things going.
Corporate tax rate back up to 28%, I believe, from the present 21%.
Right, and it was lowered because the U.S. was not competitive with the rest of the world. The OECD countries have an average rate of about 20, maybe even a little less. So we were bringing the tax rate down to what the rest of the world had. Money is fungible. We've seen this no matter what. If somebody raises a tax somewhere, they go buy the product somewhere else, especially when you can get, for example, tobacco taxes. You can buy cigarettes online or drive to another state that has a lower tax rate. And look at all the changes being made in states like California and New York, where they're fleeing in droves because the state taxes are too high. They're going down to places like Texas and Florida, where the income taxes either don't exist or they're very low. And the same thing will occur with large corporations that will simply, once again, move overseas. That was the purpose of lowering the rate, was to bring them back.
I want you to talk about the similarities between the present infrastructure bill, which we are likely to see very, very soon. I haven't seen any details of it yet, but a lot of it, I think, is going to be involving rural broadband and things of that sort. We saw an infrastructure program in the Obama administration after the stock market took its dive. They talked about shovel-ready jobs, which turned out to be not so shovel-ready. Right. Can you compare what we're about to see with what happened then and how much money was wasted?
Well, broadband is an interesting area because it's unclear to me who really, really, really doesn't have access to some kind of broadband. There are places, there's no question about it. And there are numerous ways to obtain access to the internet. TV white space is one. You can have a satellite, because in many places it's very expensive to run a wire, literally, from one place to another. In broad, open rural areas, it's a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive. But a lot of companies are doing that on their own anyway. And there are programs that exist now at the FCC and other agencies to help support those kinds of efforts. Universal Service Fund, the E-rate, other places, helping local schools. It's all there. And in the American Rescue Plan, they provided flexibility for state and local governments to spend money on broadband. And individuals, businesses, there's no limit on which area the money can be spent. So they already have money that could be spent and leftover money from prior bills. But they have, I think, a $90 billion broadband proposal being introduced in the House and Senate that may or may not be included in this bigger infrastructure bill. Our biggest issue is having municipal broadband projects being funded by taxpayers, because they take a long time, they can't keep up with technology, they have to be maintained, and they simply can't duplicate what private companies do. It just can't be done. And almost every area has more than one choice.
Has anybody ever cataloged how much money was lost in that Obama stimulus program?
Well, there was a website called recovery.gov that did a pretty good job of tracking how the money was being spent. But there are numerous examples. I can think of a particular project in Colorado called EagleNet that we've written about at CAGW. CAGW is now in the process of putting together a comprehensive report on municipal broadband and the impact on taxpayers and local governments, and what could be done to perhaps make sure that the money isn't wasted on any of these projects. The other thing that may occur in this bill is that the federal government may say, even if a state prohibits local governments from building a broadband project, the federal government could override that. And the FCC has already said, wait, you can't do that. You have to leave it up to the local governments because it's their decision. But you have dark fiber, as it's called, where they build a broadband system and then there's no one who uses it because it just doesn't work or it's too expensive. There's an example one example in Utah. Google bought one of the municipal projects for $1 because they spent all this money and they couldn't make it back and it was just sitting there.
Last question, Tom. You've been in the watchdog business for how many years now?
A lot.
Okay,
no, I joined CAGW in 1986.
1986. So you've seen how the process works. Describe to me in the spectrum of wasteful spending through the years you've been here, this present spate of wasteful spending, if you want to call it wasteful spending, indeed, from the American Rescue Plan to the infrastructure plan to the tax increases that we're likely to see any week, any month now.
Well, it's certainly, in any perspective, it's the largest amount of money that is going out at one time, and the largest tax increase we've seen since I started working at CAGW 35 years ago. $4 trillion for tax increases, $2 trillion transportation bill at least, and again this $5.7 trillion for quote-unquote COVID relief, again noting that not all of it went for COVID relief, and the economy's already recovering. If everybody is vaccinated by May, June, or whatever it might be, it's not totally normal like it was before because people will still want to stay home or be more careful, but it's pretty close. And the Congressional Budget Office said before the $1.9 trillion plan was passed and signed into law that we would be back to pre-pandemic levels in the middle of this summer. And yet on top of all that, they threw out $1.9 trillion. You can have inflation problems, you will certainly have wasteful spending, and taxpayers need to take a good hard look at what's happening with this money.
Given those facts which you just cited, I lied, one more question. Those facts which you just cited, what is the ultimate purpose of the spending spree?
It's to achieve policy objectives. It's not to do anything other than to get into law, enacted into law, all kinds of projects and programs that otherwise would not occur. That's why they use what's called reconciliation, where it requires a majority vote. There's an $86 billion bailout for multi-employer union pensions in that bill. Nothing to do with COVID. They've been trying to get that done for years. There's $5 billion for debt, to relieve debt for minority farmers, which may or may not have merit on its own, but it wasn't debated separately. It was a bill that went through the Senate Agriculture Committee, added on to the American Rescue Plan. And that's something that they never fully examined. So, as I said, it's just a way to get through a lot of things that the Democrats have been just trying to get done for a very long time. And then, of course, there's the whole Senate filibuster issue and whether they can pass everything with a majority vote. They just can't wait to spend and waste the taxpayers' money.
Tom Schatz from Citizens Against Government Waste, thanks very much for your time. Thanks for your insights.
Thanks, Doug.